Just go into it's Parshas Vayetze, and there is a very famous kasha that is asked: why is it that Yaakov Avinu married two sisters? And according to many, the two, Bilhah and Zilpah, were half sisters. They were also involved in something that would be a isser for a person to do. So the Ramban takes an approach that he did it out of Eretz Yisrael. So once you're out of Eretz Yisrael, and it was before Matan Torah, before the Torah was given, so he was allowed to do it. The Ksav Sofer, has a very unique, the Ksav Sofer was the son of the Chassam Sofer, and he lived like 160 years ago. And he says that the isser to marry a sister, the pasuk says, is litzror b'chayeha. Litzror means to have trouble. The isha el achosa lo sikach. A man should not marry a woman and her sister. Why? Litzror aleha b'chayeha. So that means that there will be litzror, there'll be tsaros between the two, that there'll be jealousy if you marry two sisters. But if, let's say, chas v'shalom, the wife dies, so then you're allowed to marry the sister. Now, we don't have in any of our listing of arroyos, such a rule. In other words, if someone is not allowed to marry the sister of a brother, so then you're just not allowed to do it ever, even if the person dies or doesn't die. The only place that the Torah makes a difference, if the person is alive or not, is by a sister. That you can marry. The Novominska's Rebbitzin passed away, and he married her sister. Yes.
I know.
Yes.
Even among young
know
people,
the
the
system.
Mila, that some sisters ask, I know I'm going to die, could you please marry my husband, bring up my children? And the answer comes, a lot of Rebbe's, Menashe Klein's son, the son who took over for him here, he lost his first wife, and she was the daughter of the Lander Rebbe. She asked her sister, and his sister did it, and she's wonderful. His children, they have children together too. Married off already.
Yeah, the reason for this is because it says one extra word in the pasuk, b'chayeha, that you can't marry a sister while she is alive. So the Gemara darshans on that if she passes away, then you could marry the sister. But the Ksav Sofer says that Yaakov Avinu made a cheshbon. Now, if a Rav today of a shul said this, not many would appreciate the word, because he says that since it says litzor in the pasuk that they're going to fight, Yaakov Avinu felt that he saw in the two of them that there was such a devotion between Rachel and Leah, that they would never have that resentment of kinah. Now the pasuk does say in one spot, Vatakane Rachel, after she had the children, it says Vatakane, which means, and she was jealous. So you see, there was jealousy, but the Mefarshim explained it didn't mean jealousy the way we mean jealousy. It was that she had such tremendous chosam And it was that Rachel was jealous of, that the level of who Leah was. Let's remember that Yaakov Avinu min hashamayim, he wanted Rachel because there are two levels. Leah was from Bina, which was a very lofty, high level. And Rachel was Malchus, which is the bottom of the seven midas, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, all that, down to Malchus. But it's from Malchus that the entire world is sustained. And all the bracha that comes down to people here in Olam Hazeh is because of Malchus, Rachel Imenu, and that's why she was chosen. There's a heavenly chariot that is referred to. You find it in Yechezkel, the first parak of Yechezkel, which is a haftorah that we read on the first day of Shavuos. It's parak Aleph. And he talks about, he had a dream and he saw the Maisei HaMerkava. He saw everything going on with this heavenly chariot. Now the four legs of the chariot is Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Rachel. Rachel. Because she is the one who brings, so Yaakov Avinu thought he could marry her first. But the fact is that Bina, which is Chochmah, Bina, and Das, that comes before you go down to Chesed, and therefore it had Min HaShemayim, it had to be that he'd end up marrying her. It turned out that it was because Lavan was trying to cheat him or whatever he was doing, but the bottom line was that he actually married Leah before Rachel. The pasuk says, Vayehi baboker, it was the morning, V'hinehi Leah. And he discovered that it was Leah, not Rachel. So the fact that he married Rachel, that had to be because she was a Bechina, and that's the reason she was buried with Yaakov Avinu in Maras HaMachpelah and not Rachel. Now, so Rachel was a key in that companionship of all of the midos and everything else. And Rachel was like crowned the mother of Klal Yisrael. They say, many people say in Eretz Yisrael, where are you going? I'm going to the Mama Rachel, meaning Rachel Imenu, to her kever, where she's buried. And so I was in the middle of telling you, the Ksav Sofer says that Yaakov Avinu had a cheshbon that the Torah said a reason not to marry two sisters. It says litzror, it's going to be fighting. And he held that there will never be fighting between Rachel and Leah. Now, Shlomo HaMelech, the Torah says you shouldn't have too many susim, the king should not have too many wives, too many. And he said, I will not, because it says that they will make him go astray. And he said, no, I'm not, it's not applicable. And he paid a price for that mistake because he was after Matan Torah. So he wasn't allowed to make that distinction, but says the Ksav Sofer, that when it came to Rachel and Leah and Yaakov Avinu, they lived all before Matan Torah. So Yaakov Avinu had that leeway to make that distinction. And that's why he married two sisters. Because it says, Litzur, a reason, and it's before Matan Torah, so I can, if I feel the reason being given, the Torah doesn't always give a reason. But where it's giving a reason, before Matan Torah, I have the right to decide if it will be applicable or not. And he decided not, and that's the reason that he married Leah. Now, Rachel And the Meforshim bring in another case, but it really applies to what I just said. In this week's Sedra, we find that Reuven, the son of Leah, he was the son of Leah, the firstborn, that he went out to the field and he brought back dudoim. There's a whole discussion what type of flour this dudoim are, but it's a flour. And he's walking back, and he gives to his mother the bouquet. And Rachel saw it, and Rachel said to Leah, I would like to have some of the flowers. So Leah answered her and said, what? You took my husband? You took my husband and now you want the flowers also? I mean, look at the pasuk. This is a pasuk by Ravi, right between Ravi and... So Rachel answered and said, if you give me the flowers, then you could spend the evening with my night with Yaakov, you can have my night. And he was with, and that story, the Meforshim are quick to point out the level of Rachel and Daniel. Because let's not forget that Rachel said, if I don't prepare my sister properly, then she's going to end up staying unmarried. She doesn't want Esav. The whole world said Esav will marry Leah and Yaakov will marry Rachel. That in her mind, the Medrash says that she was doing this favor and giving up her entire life. That she herself would never end up marrying because she was destined for Yaakov. And here she was preparing her sister. She gave her sister all the signs that Yaakov gave to her so that Lavan, because the Medrash says when Yaakov Avinu said to Rachel, I want to marry you, so she answered and said, yes, I want to marry you, I'm asking. But I must tell you before we get married that my father is an absolute Ramai, not a fool, a conniving character. In other words, very slippery. Sly, yeah, conniving. I mean, look what he did over here. As a matter of fact, the Medrash says that the pasuk says that when he made the chasna, which Yaakov thought was he with Rachel, turned out to be Leah, that the pasuk says, Vayesov Lovan es ha'ir, vayas mishte. So the Medrash asks, what do you mean he got together all the people and he made the chasna, the dinner? It should first say vayas mishte, you have to cook the food, you have to prepare, and then you gather the people. So the Medrash answers and says that no, he first had the people come and he went to the coat room. The Medrash says this. He went to the coat room and took all the coats of the people and he farmashkined them. He took all the coats,
collateralized,
and he got money from the person who took all the coats of the people waiting in the other room, and it was with that money he went and bought the food for the things that were sitting there for 2 hours. So says the Medrash. And that's why the pasuk says he gathered all the people, and then vayas mishte, because it's...
the coats. But isn't it like didn't Rachel betray Yaakov? I can't see. Yeah.
Well, the truth is this, that she warned him. She even said before, she said, you have to give me simonim signs because the room will be completely dark. We see he didn't know who he was with. He thought he was with Rachel, but when it was Baboker, it became morning. V'hine hi Leah. That's when he the pasuk says it. Then he discovered it was Leah. And it says the Medrash that Rachel was under the bed. And she was talking. In other words, when he asked a question in the room, she answered. Because maybe he would detect it was a different voice. So it says that she did it, and the Medrash says that she did all of this because she felt that her sister will end up never married. So she was ready to give her life and her marriage, because Rachel, the Medrash of the Pharisees, thought that if she gives Leah, that's it.
But marriage is based on trust. If Yaakov couldn't trust her because she gave away the money,
she was doing it. She was Moisa Nefesh for a sister, and she felt that she warned Yaakov before, even about the shidduch, that it could be my father's going to come and say we don't, and that's what he said. We don't give the younger one before the older one, and all of that.
The case, she gave Simonim away.
She gave the Simonim to Yaakov. She told it to him, and she was a participant in the room to make sure that Yaakov wouldn't know, and he didn't know. In the morning, V'hine hi Leah.
I think the townspeople will also sing the song to clue him that it's going to be a deception. But he didn't speak the language, he didn't know. Everybody knew.
The Medrash says that everybody in town knew that he was going to end up with Leah first. They knew Lavan. You know, there's a Hasidic. It says that when he met the shepherds, so Yaakov Avinu says, "Hayadatem es Lavan ben Echor." Do any of you know Lavan, who lives in this area? They answered, "Vayomru Yodanu." So the Medrash says they didn't just say, "Yeah, we know who you're talking about." It's okay. They said, "Oh, Yodanu. Oh, do we know this guy?" In other words, the Medrash is madgish, underscores that word Yodanu. It wasn't just a simple answer, Yodanu, we know, or we have an idea who you're talking about. They said, "Oh, do we know this guy?" But what I wanted to tell you is that the Meforshim are fascinated that here Leah says to her, "You took my husband," because Yaakov really favored Rachel. The pasuk says, "Vayehav Yaakov es Rachel mi Leah." It says it. So she could have answered and said, "Just 1 minute, Leah. 1 minute.
Okay.
Let's reminisce. Let's look back for a minute. You were ready to stay the rest of your life unmarried, and I was ready to put myself into that position so that you should marry Yaakov. What do you mean I took your husband? It was my husband, and I gave him away to you." But she didn't say anything. She didn't answer. So that Yaakov Avinu saw with Ruach HaKodesh, and that's why he said, Litzror does not apply, that there'll be jealousy one to the other. Because even when Leah will throw it in her face, she's not going to come back with a knockout punch. "Oh, I took your husband." Let's look back at what the story was. She said nothing. And she let her go on. So it was throughout her life that she never, ever put down Leah or reminded her. Never discussed it, right? Remember, I was under the bed? I was doing the talking for you. You pulled it off because of me. But you didn't say anything to her.
But Leah was great also, because the rest of the town did put her down. "Oh, this is the one who took her sister's husband." And they did, and she was willing, because she wanted the kids so much.
But it was not,
she did it.
But it was not,
She was very grateful.
but it was not Rachel.
No, it was very novel, but it's.
Then
like
my only
itself was a
point
great woman.
is about Rachel, why she became
She
the
was great
Daladig,
to
the fourth leg of the Merkava, to be mashpia, to have the flow of graciousness and bracha, all blessing that comes, is through Malchus, funneled through Rachel Imenu. And it was because of this Hanaga that she never, ever, ever. Now it says,
Rabbi Balkany,
yes.
wouldn't Lavan rather have Esau as a Bechutah than Yaakov?
Well, I'll tell you, when he said to Yaakov, Tov titiosa, that I'm better off giving her to you, mititiosa leish acher, is the Medrash says, because he made a cheshbon, he said, if I give you, speaking to Yaakov, to Rachel, then it's going to be two tzaddikim. She's a tzaddikis and you're a tzaddik, and that's where it will be contained under that umbrella. But if I give you to if Esav marries Leah, then she's going to turn him into a tzaddik. And there's going to be 4 tzaddikim in the world. So I'm better off, I'm happier to give her to you and only have 2 tzaddikim come forth than to have the 4 of you get married and there's going to be 4 tzaddikim. Medrash says it, that's why that's the pshat in the pasuk. We see in general that it's so much above our hasaga, the stories. With all of the Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov were all shepherds. The Arizal says is because that when the world was created, all the neshamas of Klal Yisrael were put into the sheep. Into the sheep. Not as Gilgulim, like as a treasure chest, where they would be, and they would be moiled as they had children. Another sheep died or was shechted, and the neshama was taken from that treasure chest and became part of Klal Yisrael. And when he had to depart, it says that Yaakov Avinu said to him, you want to pay me for my work. I'm only asking you for the striped and the speckled. If you take a look in the Psukim, they wanted a specific type of sheep, of the tzom, that had it. And Laban was so happy because there were very few like that. But when Yaakov touched with his makil the sheep, they turned into thousands, tens of them, because they were all neshama, says the Arizal, of Klal Yisrael. And that's why they were shepherds, because they were shepherding as a matter of fact, the Yismach Moshe, who lived just 190 or 200 years ago, and he was the beginning of the Satmar dynasty. The Satmar Rebbe, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, Rabbi Yoel, the famous Satmar Rebbe, he always quoted his great-great-grandfather, the Yismach Moshe, who was his great-great-grandfather, and he said that I remember being one of the neshamas in the tzon of Lavan, and as a matter of fact, he one time hit me with his rod, with his makel, and here, this mark on my head is from that this is what he said. He used to quote. So we see that it's not just a story of sheep and this. There was some very profound, deep things, that happened over there, and the fact that there's a big kasha that's asked that Leah had 4 children. She had Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. And it says that she said, Apam Odes Hashem, now I want to thank Hashem. And the Medrash says nobody thanked HaKadosh Baruch Hu, before that. And we find Noach got off of the teva and he made a carbon right away of thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We see that there were many. So they say there was no one who thanked after the thing happened in their favor, tipped that the scale was so tipped. In other words, the way and the fashion of how she thanked, she was the first person. But it says in that pasuk, as soon as she thanked Hashem, it says, Vatamod miledes, that she stopped, she didn't give birth at that point to any more children.
So where was Dina?
Dina was born later. As a matter of fact, after all the boys were born, all the boys, then it says, Va'achrei kain, Yolda Bas, and it was Dina. And Leah did a favor then, because the neshama in Dina was a boy. It was supposed to be a boy. And she said that the two shifchas, the two maidservants, each had two boys. So if I have another boy now, there's only supposed to be 12 in the Shvatim, 12. So if she is a boy, then there's only room that's 11. Then my sister Rachel will only have one boy. And at the end she had Yosef and Binyamin. And she davened, and it was changed from a zachar to a nekeva. So it says, that, and that's why Dina was born. Dina was born.
They say that's why Yosef had like to curl his hair in cosmetics, because he had a little bit left of that original female tchuna characteristics in him.
Yeah, the Medrash talks a little bit about that. That's why the men in the jail were all running out. He never did any Aveira, but they wanted him. They wanted him. And even Potiphar wanted him in the house. He was married to his wife. You know, when it comes to... but I want to tell you the Tur, who lived 800, 900 years ago, the Balaturim, when we say at the bottom of the Chumash, the Balaturim, that's the Tur Shulchan Aruch, that's the Rosh's son. The Rosh, the world famous Rosh, who's at the end of every Masechta. The first thing you come to is the Rosh, right after a Masechta ends. So his son was the Tur Shulchan Aruch. And the Tur says that once Leah stopped to daven, that's why Vatamod miledes, that she stopped. In other words, she gave her thanks, Hapam Odes Hashem, and then she left it at that point.
On purpose.
And she, not on purpose, well, the Chazal do say that she said, if there's 12, and I already had 3, and now I have 4, somebody's going to run short. That's where they say that she davened about Dina. So the point being that the tefillah brings about, a person has to know that when they live in Olam Hazeh, that they could sit and learn an entire day, but if they're not davening, they're not going to get the bracha. That means when it says Talmud Torah Connected Kulam, yeah, in Olam Haba, you're going to be up front, you're going to have this, you're going to have... But when it comes to the Gashmias of this world, children, money, health, a person has to daven for it. And that the Torah, this Torah that we're talking about, says on that pasuk that the whole reason Vatamod miledes, she would have continued to had she continued davening the way she was davening, she would have had another one and another one that she would have had. But Vatamod miledes, because of the fact that she said thank you and left it at that. She didn't go further with it. Now, I want to say to you that the Shaloh HaKadosh is lived around 375 years ago. He's buried in Tveria, and you see that not only, and there's only 6 people really that we say Kadosh. I said it by one of the Shabbos Shiurim. You know, we say Rashi HaKadosh, the Alshich HaKadosh, the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, Rashi HaKadosh, Rabbeinu, Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, Rabbeinu HaKadosh. You'll see there's only around 6, and the Shloah HaKadosh. Now the Shloah HaKadosh is buried in Tveria in a cemetery that you could tell just by the fact that he's buried there that he must have been a super giant in Ruchnius. Because who was he buried right next to? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai from 2,000 years before him. 1800 years before. Rebbe Elazar Reb Hyrcanus, the Rebbe of Rabbi Akiva. I mean, they're 10 of the biggest of the big in that cemetery. There's only 9. The 10th is the Shloah HaKadosh. So the fact that for 1,800 years no one was ever zoicha to be buried in that cemetery except for the Shloah HaKadosh.
Is that on the street in the caddy corner?
I'm sorry?
That cemetery, is that like on the street? It's on the street in the caddy
It's
corner?
right on the street. You go up
Yeah.
the steps. They
Right.
fixed it like if you went there 30 years
I
ago,
saw it.
it was very dilapidated and whatever. But now they really, some Sephardi from Brooklyn went and paid whatever he had to pay. He won because the Rambam is buried off to the side. But the Rambam with his father, but he's not part of the 10 who are buried. There's the cemetery, and then you have to go up another few stairs and go to the right, and that's where the Rambam is. He's not part of that cemetery. So the Shloah HaKadosh asks a question that at the end of the Sedra, we find that Yaakov Avinu had a dream, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him, leave, take your wives, your children, and go. And it's interesting because, says the Shloah HaKadosh, that when he got up in the morning, he went to his wives and he said, look, I had last night a dream that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told me to leave. What do you think of it? So the Shloah HaKadosh says, and he has a whole 7 psukim, a discussion with them, and they answer, of course we're happy to go and to leave. We have nothing with our father. He's not giving us anything he never was. Look at the psukim. This is not a medrash. This is the open psukim. So the Shloah HaKadosh says, if somebody came to you, to any of us, and we knew for a fact it wasn't some wild dream, but it was HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, do this or that, we would then have a discussion. What do you think? Should we leave? Should we not leave? We'd jump out of the bed and we would grab our things and we would say, pack up, we're going. And he wouldn't have asked. So the Shloah HaKadosh says, because even in a case where God himself, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself comes to you and tells you to do X, Y, or Z, you're living in Olam Hazeh. You're living in a physical, human world. And you have to treat human beings with the dignity and with the respect. And don't just order them, even though nothing higher. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told you, son, discuss it with them, make them feel that they're part of the decision, and they're involved in the entire process and the entire outcome of what they're going to do. And after they got done talking, the wives, he said, okay, we're leaving.
But Rachel knew she would probably die. Because he's in Eretz Yisrael, he's not allowed to have the 2 wives.
Not necessarily. According to, if you read the Ksav Sofer, he said, not only he did it, but it was perfectly mutter. It was before Matan Torah. Yeah. Don't forget Rachel Imenu. Does anyone here know how long she lived?
37 years, something like that.
36 years.
36 years.
She was-
She lived
oh.
39 years later. Oh, 3 years later.
Yeah.
No,
52.
Leah was
52.
45 years.
Oh, I thought you
She
was
was
Leah lived 45 years and Rochli Menu 36. We would have assumed from reading the Parshat that at least 100 years old or something. But they were young. They were young and their lives were, at the time that they had to go. And Yaakov Avinu, of course, lived 147 years. But he remained, as it says, the chashivos and the dignity, the distinction to his wives, says the Shloah HaKadosh, you can't see anything which is more than that in terms of respect for a wife that HaKadosh Baruch Hu just got done telling you, and you know it was HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but you didn't just say run. You took the time and the patience to discuss it and let them make a decision. Now, at the beginning of this Sedra, it talks about that Yaakov had a dream. First it says that he had a dream. V'hine malachi Elokim olim v'yordim bo. The Balaturim says, the same that we just quoted before, he says that sulam, a ladder, is begematria, the numerical value of the word sulam is mamo, money. And the message to Yaakov Avinu was that money is like fire. So says the Medrash, that money is like fire. You see, you can take fire and you can cook a delicious meal, and you can have heat in a house, you can be warm in a bitter cold winter, but fire can also be a destroyer. It can burn down a house. It could wreak havoc. It could kill people. Fire.
Fire is anger.
Fire is anger. And that's why the Mekubalim make that distinction, that water, if you pour it, it will go down. In other words, if I took this cup and I poured, it wouldn't suddenly start going up, but fire goes up. Eish is din. Eish is gevura, is strict toughness. It represents din. And water is represented by chesed, and that it always goes from a stable place to the simplest, into the ground, down. That the Mayim has that distinction, but the message of the Sulam, says the Balaturim, was that you're in an olam of Gashmias, and you have to realize that Gashmias can bring you up. A person could take $1 and give it to somebody for tzedakah. He acquired 5 bushel baskets of schusim with that $1. Person went and bought himself a coffee, didn't drink anything for 5 hours or 10 hours. That $1 can be elevated, can elevate the person. When it comes to money, the money can do so much good, and a person can acquire everything. There's some people, they don't have children, so they make sure someone's going to say Kaddish for them, and they usually pay them. They give them, say, well, whenever my day comes, be there for me. And they say all the 7 Kadeshim a day that have to be said, as the Arizal says, that every one of the Kadeshim protects the Neshama for a certain amount, and he writes how it works and how many, like one's for an hour and a half, and he makes the cheshbon of why we say specifically that number as a minimum. That means if someone wants to say an extra Kaddish on a Kaddish D'Rabbanan from Mishnayos or whatever, of course he's allowed to do it, and the schus of people answering Yehi Shmei Rabbah is direct effect to the neshama. Like someone who has 105 fever, and that's a serious fever. It's not 101, it's 105. And you take the 2 bare aspirins, and after an hour or two, the Kaddish does that for the neshama. So the message to Yaakov Avinu was that you're coming into a world of Gashmias, and it's like sulam, it's like money. That money can elevate a person, and it could destroy a person. Many people who cannot handle money, they go crazy. In other words, you see it as an extreme. Someone wins the lottery. There's people who won the lottery, and they ended up after a year in worse trouble with the money than they were before they even started and here they had $30 million. They had such money that was available to them. But not only that, a person, it's broken up families, people, if they can't handle the success of having such a bracha, then they can lose themselves and they feel they're in the driver's seat, no one's better, and they can do whatever they want, like sometimes you see the haughtiness or the arrogance of some gevirim, and it's only for one reason. It's not that they have 3 PhDs, it's not that that they finish Shas, it's only because of the money.
You're supposed to respect a rich man.
Yeah, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, the Gemara says, was Machabed Ashirim. He himself, the Gemara says that he was so wealthy that in the times when no one in the whole Eretz Yisrael had radishes on their table, in the time that there wasn't a radish to be found, he had every day, every type of vegetable on his table. Sanon and chazeres, the Gemara says, sanon are radishes, and chazeres is a type of lettuce. And he had it because he was so wealthy. But before he died, he picked up his hands, and on the day that he was niftar, he said, Shamayim is my testimony, my witness, that I never was nene, I never had the pleasure of olam hazeh, not even for one of these fingers. Which means with all the wealth and with everything, he wasn't into the olam hazeh. It was for whatever he used it for the aniyim or for the people, for whatever
He
he
didn't
had.
have enough, he gave for aniyim, he didn't have enough from it.
Well, he had a ruchniistic hana. And I guess a human hana to some extent,
Sure.
because he felt he was taking care of people, feeding people. And it says that Yaakov Avinu went to sleep, and there were all these stones wanted to be under him. I mean, why couldn't he have just gathered? Why did it have to become one stone? Because no matter how lofty a person is spiritually, if there's not unity, that means a person could be learning Kol HaShas Kula every year or every 2 years. But if he is not part of promoting good atmosphere amongst people, which is a unifying force, when you make people at a table comfortable, when you make them feel wanted, you feel that they are welcome, you feel this, that is something that promotes unity, and it is a unifying force. And the Meforshim said, it's not my word, that's why he insisted it be one stone. But interestingly, people commonly think, because it says right there, that v'ha'evan hazos asher samti matzeva yiyah beis Elokim b'chol asher titan li aser asrenu loch, that he took this stone and he made a matzeva, like a testament, like we have a stone, a monument in a cemetery. He took that stone. But the Meforshim, it's very interesting. It was a heavy stone, and he took it with him to Luz. Now, it's not like when you read the pasuk, it sounds as if he was standing here and he walked 10 feet over there and he put the stone and he made it a monument. It was a far distance, and he had to he carried that stone with him. So the Meforshim asked, I mean, it was a heavy stone. Why didn't he simply leave the stone there? And if he wanted a matzeva in Luz, there's stones in Luz. Go take a stone and make a monument over there. Why did you have to break your back to carry the stone, which was such a undertaking? And they answer and say, because a person who is divinely inspired, and all of our inspiration comes for a reason. We hear a speech and the person liked the thought that was expressed and they felt that it was worth the time and it was valid. It validizes the time spent for the speaker, that was worth the time to give up the hour or the half hour, because there were things that were said that did send a message to me and did uplift me. And Yaakov Avinu felt that inspiration has to be seized upon immediately. And it was through the stone that he slept on that gave him the inspiration. We're going to give Meiser, we're going to do this. He promised all these things. Because of that inspiration, he said, this stone is coming with me. I'm not, because if you don't take with you that original inspiration, it's not going to be the same. So even if he would have taken a stone in Luz as a monument to what had happened, it never would have been the same as the original occurrence. Now, I just want to take the last 2 minutes. Yes?
Well, isn't there something like with the stone also under his head, but it didn't protect his body because there was snakes and other things. There was something about the way he slept with the stone. I don't remember, but there's something about the stone.
He was protected because, and it's part of that vort that I just said to you about unity. You know, the Sanzer Rebbe asked a question, and this is not what I wanted to end with, but I'm going to come back to it in a second. We say after the Sefer Torah is put back on Monday and Thursday, we say a series of Yehi Ratzons. Yehi Ratzon milifnei Avinu Shabashamayim Shanishma v'nisbaser b'soros tovos, and the whole tzibur calls out Amen, and we say like 5 Yehi Ratzons. Then this last one is Achenu b'nei Yisrael. So the Sanzer Rebbe, Reb Chaim Sanzer, said, why for the 6 isn't there also the words Yehi Ratzon before? In other words, every stanza we begin with Yehi Ratzon. So why the last one, when we say Achenu b'nei Yisrael hanesunim batzorim v'ashivya ha'omdim bein bayam uvein bayabasha ha'makom yirachim aleim, that we ask on behalf of all our brethren worldwide that if they're in trouble, take them out of the trouble. If they need this, they need. So why don't we begin that last and the final one with Yehi Ratzon, also the words Yehi Ratzon? So he said, because if it's truly Achenu b'nei Yisrael, that's the biggest Yehi Ratzon for our Kodesh Baruch.
But I want to add something to. He was very inspired. I heard this year because the Malachim on the Sulam, they danced with him because they recognized that he was on the Merkava Kodesh Baruch Hu. He was one of the faces. And when I told him, we know him from Bashamayim, they managed that. And well, that must have been very inspiring.
Yes.
They danced with literally.
So the question, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, once one of his famous. It says that where was he sleeping? He was sleeping on the Har Bais.
Really?
But he was on his way to Haran. Haran was like 400 miles away. And he realized, the Medrash says, that with everything that he had done, he had just got done learning 14 years in the Yeshiva of Shem Ve'ever. And by the way, Chazal say, Yitzchak and Rivka told him, you go to Lovan. What was his heter for 14 years to go off? I mean, your father and mother, you had a mitzvah of kibbut av v'ein. They told you to go to your uncle Lovan.
He had to learn how to be sly.
Yeah.
Were they born yet, the
They
children?
they had to be.
Which
small.
children?
They had
Mother
to
to
be.
be
I mean, was Rachel born, Rachel born yet?
No, how could you, they weren't married yet. It was before he
I'm saying
came
they
to
born,
love.
because if they were, he went to learn and they weren't born yet.
Oh, you mean born were they alive
Yeah.
at that time? Yeah, they were. They were, but he went for 14 years there because, as was said, because he learned Torah by Avram Avinu very much, and then by Yitzchak Avinu. The Medrash says, when it says Ish Tam, it doesn't mean a fool. It means somebody, they say by Yaakov Avinu last week, that is this week, that when Rachel said to him, I have to tell you, if you want to marry me, no problem, I'm happy to marry you, but you must know before that my father is deceitful and a cheat. And you have to know what you're getting into. So Yaakov answered and said, Achi, that he is my brother.
Oh, yes.
So the Mefarshah says, what do you mean, brother? He was an uncle. He wasn't a brother.
Yeah, but his own brother was.
So the Medrash says he was a brother in Ramos, and he answered Rachel, and he said, listen, I'm into the world of Torah and everything, but if he wants to start up with his whatever, he's met his match. That's what he said to her. The Medrash says up the Farish.
So you learned how to be streetwise?
Well,
And,
he did.
and how did he know
what
that?
they said.
From the 14 years that he was in, because the Torah he learned in the house of Yitzchak and Avram was not with all this shtick and with all this
But he knew how to
deceitfulness.
take care of Esav. He was pretty good with Esav.
You mean how to handle with
Yeah,
him?
he knew
Yeah.
how to handle
So you
fun.
see- so
He
you
knew
see-
he wasn't
So you
stupid.
see that it wasn't just like we want to make.
He sent his son to kill him.
We
He
can't
knew how to
just
do it.
project him as like some simpleton who sat by a Gemara and he didn't correct. He dealt with Esav also. So he was like his brother in Ramos. But where did he learn it? So the Chazal say he got it he learned Torah for 14. He never slept. For 14 years, he didn't sleep.
You learned it by Shem Va'aver?
And Shem Va'aver. Shem was the son of Noach, who lived through the Dor Hamabel, and Aver was from the Dor Hafloga. So they both were teaching Torah, but they knew what was doing in the world, and they gave it over in the flavor of discussion and whatever. So when Yaakov Avinu went, he knew how to handle this Lavan. And it says that he changed Tachlev Maskurti Asara Yomim, Asara Pamim, that you changed whatever we made up 10 different times. And the Medrash said it wasn't 10 times. The Pasuk says 10 times,
100
but it means 10 times 10. It was 100 times. That every second day he came up with a new twist for what he has to do and how much he'd be paid and all of that.
Twisted mind.
So this was, who Lavan was. And as a matter of that Arizal says that Barzilai Hagilodi, if you learn in Tanakh, there was somebody called Barzilai. And Barzilai, if you take the letters of his name, he was a neshama of Lavan, and as a matter of fact, he went first into
He was David's friend.
Barzilai Hagilad,
He was.
But I'm talking about that the neshama of Lavan first went into Bilam. That was the neshama of Lavan. But then, if you take the letters Barzilai, it's Bilha, Rachel, Zilpa,
Right.
Lavan,
Not Leah?
Leah.
Leah, and Yaakov, or Zilai. Now Rizal says that he had a composition, like a total makeup of all the tchunas hanefesh of all of them, and that's why his name is Barzilai, incorporating all of the four
Who was he?
wives. He was a friend of David. You have to.
But Korah Barzel, they had to go through it because of Bilhah Rivka Zilpah. There was something they inherited that wasn't so pure, that had to be cleaned out.
So the point that I want to say to you before I wish you a good evening is that Yaakov Avinu, he was prepared with how to deal with Lavan, and he was on his way to Haran, and he said, wait a second, I slept on I passed Yerushalayim on his way to Haran, and I didn't go to daven in the place where my father's daven, by the Akedah, by everything. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it says, Kaf Tzalo Aderech, that means it was 400 miles away, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu took the whole Yerushalayim and put it 2 feet away from him, that he didn't have to go walk all the way back, because he was such a tzaddik, and he davened. And he realized, Yaakov Avinu realized, that with all the Torah he learned in his father and grandfather's house, and the Torah of Shem V'Ever, but without tefillah, without the davening, you can't get your goal. So he insisted, he was ready to walk back the 400th Amah, because he didn't know that a kaftzalo, that suddenly everything would be put, but the Medrash says everything came together and he brought it to him.
This stone was used as a cornerstone for the Bais Hamikdash. That's what somebody said to me.
Yeah, there's an opinion. You see, the first stone was put in by Rus, who was still living when David HaMelech built the first Bais Hamikdash. Now, he only built 6 rows, and those 6 rows are there in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as you see in Tanakh. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, no, stop. Your son is going to build this. Because if David would have finished building, it could never be destroyed. Never. So those 6 are there. And the first stone, and when there's tour guides that you want to see it, they can show you. The stone that Rus, the great-great-great-grandmother of David HaMelech, that when her great-great-grandson was putting in the stones to me, she said, I want to be the first, and I want to put in the first stone, and she did, and it was there. So the point that we should go away with, and I always stress it because it's so important, that Vatamod Miledes, that Leah didn't give birth to another child till she davened again. In other words, when she thought she was over and finished, she didn't daven, she didn't have any kids. She didn't have any children. The others started having Zilpah and...
So it wasn't the Dudaim.
But she was such a tzaddik.
And it wasn't the Dudaim.
It wasn't.
The Tefillah.
The tefillah.
Yeah, but what if she stopped? Why'd she stop?
She stopped davening. So anyway, Yaakov didn't realize that with everything he's coming to Haran, and the Medrash describes Haran worse than Sodom. That they were decadent, and it was terrible what was going on in Haran. So, and the Medrash says Haron Af, it's called Haran because it had the anger of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in that city. Anyway, I want to wish you a good evening and thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.